The radar operator at Taqaddum Air Base, southwest of Baghdad, wrote down 3 separate headings between 10:15 a.m. and 10:18 a.m. on May 10, 1972. All 3 were vectors toward American strike packages inbound from Thailand. The MiG-21s he was tracking acknowledged the first heading. They acknowledged the second heading. The third heading got no response, and the radar tracks started disappearing in a sequence that didn't match any known defensive maneuver or technical malfunction. The Iraqi Air Force called it an equipment failure initially. American electronic warfare, maybe. Some new jamming system the intelligence briefings hadn't covered. The tracks weren't behaving like aircraft taking evasive action. They were just gone. Present on one sweep, absent on the next. 4 contacts over 3 minutes. I found the incident summary in a batch of translated Iraqi Air Force operations reports declassified in 2009. The language is careful. Contact lost with interceptor elements appears 6 times in 2 pages. Not shot down, not destroyed, contact lost. The report writer was documenting a technical problem, not a tactical defeat, because documenting defeats in Saddam Hussein's Air Force got you reassigned to positions that didn't involve flying or sometimes breathing. What the ground controllers knew at 10:18 a.m., 4 of their interceptors had stopped responding. What they didn't know, what killed them. The radar returns showed no additional aircraft in the engagement area, no missile contrails reported by surviving pilots, no radio calls indicating visual contact with attackers. The MiGs just stopped being there. One pilot, the report uses a first name only, Khalil, radioed that he was breaking off and returning to base. His transmission cut off mid-word. The audio recording still exists in some archive the Iraqis turned over after 2003, but I've never heard it. One researcher mentioned it in a paper about Gulf War air combat communications. He described the cutoff as abrupt, which tells me nothing useful. The operations summary concludes with a recommendation for investigation into foreign technical systems employed against defensive aviation assets. Foreign technical systems, that's the phrasing. Not American F-4, Phantoms, not air-to-air missiles, foreign technical systems. Like the kills came from something they'd never seen before and couldn't categorize within their existing tactical framework. They'd seen F-4s plenty of times by May 1972. American strike packages had been hitting targets in North Vietnam for years, and Iraqi pilots flew missions supporting North Vietnamese air defense operations as volunteers. Officially, they weren't there, but the personnel rotation records tell a different story. These pilots knew what an F-4 looked like. They knew what American radar-guided missiles did. They'd trained against these exact scenarios. But the report treats the May 10th engagement like a first contact event, new threat, unknown capabilities, systemic defensive failure requiring technical investigation rather than tactical analysis. I think they knew exactly what happened. I think the language was chosen deliberately to avoid saying it directly. You don't admit your interceptors got shredded by a single American crew using weapons your doctrine said didn't work at those ranges in those conditions. You call it foreign technical systems, and you recommend investigation, and you hope someone higher up the command chain has the political room to acknowledge reality. In May 1972, Iraq, nobody had that room. The last line notes 4 pilots killed in action, names withheld pending family notification. I couldn't find the notification records. Maybe they don't exist anymore. Maybe they're still filed somewhere in Baghdad under classifications that outlasted the regime that created them. 4 kills in 3 minutes. That's what the mission report says. The number appears in multiple documents. 7th Air Force Operational Summary, Ritchie's Initial Debrief, the Aerial Victory Credit Board Review. 4 MiG-21s destroyed between 10:15 a.m. and 10:18 a.m. on May 10, 1972, by Captain Richard S. Ritchie and his weapons system operator, Captain Charles B. DeBellevue. Except the timeline doesn't work cleanly. One source says the engagement started at 10:14 a.m. Another says 10:16 a.m. The gun camera footage timestamp, which I've seen stills from but not the actual film, shows 10:15:42 for the first missile launch. But Ritchie's written debrief mentions acquiring the first target at 10:13 a.m. and tracking it for approximately 90 seconds before firing. 90 seconds of tracking puts first launch at 10:14:30. The gun camera says 10:15:42. That's a 72-second gap that nobody explains in any document I found. The kill sequence itself is documented differently depending on which report you read. Initial debrief. 4 separate engagements, 4 missiles, 4 kills. Later analysis from Air Force historians. 3 engagements, 1 resulting in 2 kills when a second MiG flew through the debris field of the first and took shrapnel damage that caused structural failure. That second version creates a cleaner timeline. 3 minutes for 3 engagements makes sense. 3 minutes for 4 separate target acquisitions and missile shots stretches belief. DeBellevue's account from a 1990 interview describes 3 radar locks. Definitely 3, not 4. He's certain about this because he called out each lock to Ritchie and he remembers the sequence. First lock, missile away, kill. Second lock, missile away, kill. Third lock, missile away, break right, second explosion 6 seconds later, 2 kills from 1 shot. But the mission report says 4 missiles expended 4. Here's where the records just stop helping. Aircraft 004 logged 4 AIM-7 Sparrows loaded before takeoff and 0 remaining after landing. The weapons load sheet exists. I've seen a photocopy. 4 missiles out, 4 missiles fired, 0 aboard at recovery. The math is simple. Except maybe one didn't guide. Maybe one went ballistic immediately after launch, and Ritchie fired a second shot at the same target. The gun camera footage would show this clearly. I don't have access to the footage. Neither do the researchers who've written about this engagement in the decades since. The film sits in some archive bin at an Air Force facility, and getting clearance to view it requires bureaucratic persistence I apparently lack. What I know for certain, 4 MiG-21s went down. Iraqi records confirm 4 losses. American intelligence confirmed 4 kills. The Aerial Victory Credits Board, notoriously skeptical, deliberately conservative in awarding kills, approved all 4 without dispute. That part is solid. The timeline and the missile count remain slippery. Some details just don't survive the transition from event to documentation to archive to historical analysis. People remember things differently. Recording equipment malfunctions. Paperwork gets filled out quickly after landing when adrenaline is still dumping into your bloodstream, and precise chronology matters less than confirming you're alive. 2 months later, Ritchie would shoot down his 5th MiG and become America's last ace. That's the story everyone remembers. 4 kills in 3 minutes on May 10th is the story that made the 5th possible. The exact sequence of how it happened remains something I can describe approximately, but not definitively. Captain Steve Tate was flying wing position in the 2nd F-4 when Ritchie started calling targets. Oyster flight, 2 aircraft. Ritchie lead, Tate as number 2. Standard MiGCAP, Migrant Combat Air Patrol, protecting strike packages heading toward Hanoi. Tate's weapons system operator was Captain James Beatty, and between the 4 of them, they had maybe 12 kills total by May 10th. That's the crew composition going in. Tate described the engagement during a 1989 reunion panel, and someone recorded it on cassette tape. The audio quality is terrible, but the substance is clear. He saw Ritchie's F-4 accelerate and pitch up into a climb. He followed. DeBellevue was calling radar contacts over the radio, multiple bogies inbound from the northwest. Tate acquired one on his own radar, different target from Ritchie's. They were sorting a furball, that's the term Tate uses, furball, with MiG-21s coming at them from multiple vectors. First missile from Ritchie's aircraft. Tate saw the smoke trail. He lost sight of it against the sun. Heard Ritchie call good hit, or maybe splash one. The tape quality makes it hard to distinguish. Tate was still tracking his own target when Ritchie fired again. Second smoke trail. Tate's radar was painting 4 contacts now, and he couldn't tell which ones were MiGs breaking off versus pressing the engagement. Then Ritchie called oyster-led defending, which meant he was being shot at and taking evasive action. Tate lost visual contact with Ritchie's aircraft completely for maybe 20 seconds. When he reacquired visual, Ritchie was in a climbing left turn and firing his third missile. Or fourth. Tate isn't certain. The interview transcript says third. The audio sounds like he hesitates before saying the number. Here's the detail that bothers me. Tate mentions seeing a parachute. One parachute, white canopy, descending through the cloud layer at approximately 18,000 feet. He reported it during debrief. The detail appears in his mission report. Then it vanishes. No subsequent document mentions a parachute. No Iraqi records. I found reference a pilot ejecting successfully from any of the 4 MiG-21s lost that day. All 4 pilots listed as killed in action. Maybe Tate saw a parachute from a different engagement happening simultaneously. May 10th was a high-tempo day with multiple strike packages and multiple air-to-air engagements. Maybe the Iraqi records are incomplete. Maybe the pilot died after ejection. I asked a researcher at the Air Force Historical Research Agency about this specific detail in 2021. He couldn't find any follow-up documentation either. Tate stayed with Ritchie through the egress. That's leaving the target area and heading back toward friendly territory. Both aircraft low on fuel. Both Winchester on missiles. Tate's F-4 never fired a shot during the entire engagement. He was defensive the whole time, trying to keep his own radar locks while maintaining visual on his lead aircraft and not getting killed by MiGs he couldn't see. The flight took 47 minutes from takeoff to landing. The engagement itself lasted 3 minutes maximum. Tate's written statement describes it as the most intense 3 minutes of combat flying I experienced in 147 missions over North Vietnam. That quote appears in multiple secondary sources. His original mission report uses different language, more clinical, less reflective, but the sentiment matches. One parachute, white canopy, 18,000 feet. Nobody wrote down what happened next. The AIM-7 Sparrow had an 8% success rate through 1968 in Vietnam. Pilots fired 340 missiles, got 27 kills. The rest went ballistic, lost track, failed to guide, detonated early, didn't detonate at all, or just flew straight into the ground because the seeker head couldn't maintain lock through weather or chaff, or the target maneuvering hard enough to break the radar beam. Nobody trusted it. Post-mission debriefs from 1966 and 1967 are full of complaints. The weapon worked beautifully at China Lake test ranges in California, where the targets flew straight and the sky was clear, and the electronics didn't have to deal with tropical humidity or G-loading or pilots who'd rather die than fly predictable flight paths. Combat was different. The Sparrow couldn't handle combat. Air Force wanted guns back. Navy wanted guns back. The F-4 Phantom was designed without an internal cannon because Robert McNamara's analysts believed missiles made guns obsolete. By 1968, everyone who actually flew the aircraft knew that analysis was garbage, but fixing it required admitting the whole procurement doctrine was wrong and Pentagon bureaucracies don't pivot that fast. Something changed between 1968 and 1972. Ritchie kept using Sparrows anyway. So did other crews. The success rate climbed to maybe 15% by 1972. Still terrible compared to guns, but better than before. New missile variants, better training, refined tactics, different target selection. Probably all of those factors combined. Here's the linguistic detail that matters. Iraqi technical assessments from May 1972 use the Arabic word sarukh for missile. Standard military terminology. But one report, translated by Defense Intelligence Agency contractors in 2004, uses sarukh khafi twice when describing the weapons that killed the 4 MiG-21s. The translator adds a note, literally hidden missile or invisible missile, idiom suggesting weapon fired from beyond visual detection range. Hidden missile. They didn't see them coming. The MiG-21 pilots never acquired visual contact with Ritchie's F-4 before the Sparrows hit. That's significant because Soviet training doctrine for MiG-21 pilots emphasized visual combat. Get close, use speed and maneuverability, force the enemy into a turning fight where the MiG's advantages mattered. You can't force a turning fight with an aircraft you can't see. Ritchie was firing from ranges where the Sparrow's probability of kill was still terrible, maybe 20% maximum. But the MiG pilots had zero awareness they were being engaged until the missiles were already tracking. No radar warning receivers on Iraqi MiG-21s in 1972. They relied on ground controllers to call out threats. Ground controllers couldn't vector them toward an F-4 that was firing from outside their visual range, then breaking off before entering the MiG's engagement envelope. The tactic wasn't complicated. It was just patient. Wait for radar lock. Fire. Don't chase the target to confirm the kill. Break off, reposition, find another target. Let the missile do the work it was designed to do, even though statistically it probably wouldn't work. 4 missiles, 4 kills. Those odds are absurd. That's 100% success rate, with a weapon system averaging 15% at best. Either Ritchie got monumentally lucky, or DeBellevue's radar work was so precise that the missiles had every possible advantage for guidance and tracking. Probably both. Luck matters. Skill makes luck more likely to happen. The Iraqis called them hidden missiles. Ritchie called them Sparrows and kept shooting until he ran out. The briefing at Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base on the morning of May 10, 1972, covered what everyone already knew. Multiple strike packages inbound to Hanoi rail yards, MiG-cap escorts assigned. Expected enemy response. Heavy. North Vietnamese were putting up everything they had, MiG-17s, MiG-19s, MiG-21s, trying to bleed the strike packages before they reached target. Standard defensive doctrine. Make the Americans pay enough that the raids stop being worth the cost. Ritchie had 3 kills already by May 10th. 2 on March 31st when he and DeBellevue splashed a pair of MiG-21s over Quang Lang Airfield, 1 more on April 30th. That made him halfway to ace status, and the Air Force public affairs machine was already preparing the narrative, even though nobody said it explicitly. First ace since Vietnam started. First American ace since Korea ended in 1953. The political value of that story was obvious to everyone who understood how badly the war was going everywhere else. DeBellevue was the best WSO in theater. That's not nostalgia or exaggeration. His radar work was precise enough that other crews requested to fly with him when their regular backseaters were unavailable. He could track multiple contacts simultaneously, prioritize threats, and guide Ritchie toward firing solutions that maximized probability of kill. The partnership worked because Ritchie trusted the information DeBellevue fed him without hesitation. Split-second decision-making requires that trust. Oyster flight launched at 9:47 a.m., 2 F-4s, Ritchie lead, Tate wing. Mission profile: escort the strike package, engage any MiGs that tried to intercept, keep the bombers alive long enough to hit their targets. The tactical assumption was simple. North Vietnamese would commit interceptors because the targets mattered, and they couldn't allow unopposed strikes against critical infrastructure. The assumption proved correct. American intelligence detected MiG activity almost immediately after the strike packages crossed into North Vietnamese airspace. Ground controllers at multiple sites were vectoring interceptors toward the inbound formations. Ritchie's radar warning receiver started lighting up before they reached the initial point. SAM sites going active. AA radar tracking them. MiGs launching from Phuc Yen and Kep airfields northeast of Hanoi. Ritchie's fuel load gave him maybe 90 minutes total airtime, including combat reserves for the return flight to Udorn. Every minute spent in the target area reduced his options for egress. That's the calculus fighter pilots run constantly. How much fuel can I burn fighting versus how much I need to get home? The mission briefing emphasized strict fuel discipline. Don't chase targets into areas where you'll run dry before reaching tanker support or friendly territory. What Ritchie knew going in, MiG-21s would be fast, numerous, and desperate. North Vietnamese pilots had standing orders to engage American strike packages regardless of tactical disadvantage. Soviet advisors were telling them to accept losses as necessary friction against American air superiority. That doctrine created opportunities for American fighters willing to exploit it. What Ritchie didn't know, he'd find 4 MiG-21s in a single engagement window. The odds of that happening, 4 targets, clean radar locks, successful missile tracks, all within 3 minutes, were low enough that planning for it would have been pointless. DeBellevue started calling contacts at 10:13 a.m., multiple bogeys, northwest vectors, high speed. Ritchie nosed up into the intercept geometry. DeBellevue was feeding him, and everything after that happened fast enough that reconstructing exact sequence requires documents that mostly don't exist anymore. DeBellevue called the first radar lock at 10:15 a.m., MiG-21 inbound from the northwest, high closure rate. Ritchie nosed up into the intercept, range decreasing, DeBellevue tracking. The Sparrow's seeker head needed continuous radar illumination from the F-4's radar to guide properly. Break the lock and the missile goes stupid. Ritchie held the geometry. First missile away at 10:15:42 according to gun camera timestamp. Smoke trail arcing up toward the target. Flight time approximately 8 seconds. The MiG-21 never maneuvered. DeBellevue saw the explosion on radar as the contact disappeared. Ritchie confirmed visual on debris. Second contact immediately. Different vector. DeBellevue had been tracking it simultaneously with the first target. Ritchie turned into the intercept. Lock. Another MiG-21. Closer this time, maybe 12 miles. The Sparrow's effective range was variable depending on altitude, closure rate, target aspect. 12 miles was marginal. Ritchie fired anyway. Second missile tracked clean. The MiG started a turn. Too late. Impact on the left wing root. The aircraft came apart in sections. Ritchie called it over the radio. 2 kills confirmed. Tate acknowledged from wing position. Third contact. DeBellevue called it northeast, low altitude, climbing. Ritchie was already turning. The fuel gauge was dropping, and he'd burned 2 missiles, which meant 2 fewer options if more MiGs showed up. He held the turn. DeBellevue locked the target, range 14 miles. Ritchie fired. The missile guided, but the explosion was different, smaller. DeBellevue saw the radar contact still there, erratic now, descending. Damaged, but flying. Ritchie started to reposition for another shot when a second explosion bloomed on DeBellevue's scope. The contact vanished. Something structural failed. Wings separated, or the fuselage broke, or the engine disintegrated. The MiG-21 was gone either way. That's 3 kills. The fourth is where my reconstruction gets uncertain. Some accounts say Ritchie fired at a 4th MiG immediately after the 3rd kill. Other accounts say the 4th target was the damaged MiG from the 3rd shot, and there were only 3 separate engagements total. Tate's description supports 3 engagements. The weapons expenditure log says 4 missiles fired. Iraqi records list 4 aircraft lost. I'm calling it 3 engagements, with 1 engagement producing 2 kills when structural damage caused catastrophic failure seconds after the initial hit. That matches DeBellevue's 1990 testimony, and it matches the timeline better than 4 separate target acquisitions in 3 minutes. Ritchie broke off at 10:18 a.m. Fuel state was critical. He'd burned maybe 2,400 pounds fighting, and he needed every remaining pound to reach the tanker track over Laos. Tate stayed in formation. Both F-4s descended and headed southwest. No additional MiG contacts. The strike package behind them hit their targets and egressed without further interceptor activity. The gun camera footage captured all of it. Missile launches, smoke trails, impacts, debris fields. That film still exists somewhere in Air Force archives. Classified for decades, eventually declassified, now mostly forgotten, except by people who study Vietnam air combat in detail that probably isn't healthy. Ritchie landed at Udorn at 10:34 a.m., 47 minutes total flight time, 3 minutes of combat, 4 enemy aircraft destroyed. The ground crew counted the empty missile rails and started the paperwork for aerial victory confirmation before Ritchie finished his initial debrief. Oyster flight touchdown, Udorn 10:34 a.m. Both aircraft taxied to the revetments and shut down. The ground crews knew something happened before Ritchie climbed out of the cockpit. Empty missile rails tell the story. 4 Sparrows gone means 4 shots taken, and you don't waste Sparrows on nothing. The initial debrief took 90 minutes. Intelligence officers, operations staff, Someone from 7th Air Force headquarters monitoring by phone. Standard questions. Time on target, radar contacts, missile performance, visual confirmation, enemy tactics observed, damage assessment. DeBellevue walked them through each radar lock. Ritchie described the geometry of each engagement. Tate confirmed what he saw from wing position. The paperwork started immediately. Gun camera footage went to photo interpretation. Film developed, frames analyzed, compared against known MiG-21 silhouettes and destruction patterns. 4 distinct sequences. 4 confirmed impacts. The interpreters marked each frame with timestamps and filed their assessment. 4 kills. No ambiguity. The evidence was clear enough that the Aerial Victory Credits Board approved all 4 without requesting additional documentation. That photograph everyone's seen, Ritchie standing next to his F-4 with 4 fingers raised, was taken 3 days later. Not immediately after landing. The public affairs machine needed time to coordinate the shot, get the lighting right, make sure Ritchie's flight suit looked clean. The image that circulated in newspapers and Air Force publications shows a pilot who's had time to process what happened. The photograph taken immediately after landing, if one exists, would show someone still running on adrenaline and probably looking less photogenic. I couldn't find that immediate post-flight photograph. Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe nobody thought to grab a camera in the 30 minutes between landing and debrief. The official photo from 3 days later is the one that survived in archives and historical collections. Ritchie's official statement, for the record: WSO performance was outstanding. Missile performance exceeded expectations. Enemy tactics were aggressive but predictable. That's the language you use when you're documenting an engagement for bureaucratic consumption. Clinical. Factual. No commentary about how it felt to shoot down 4 aircraft in 3 minutes, or what was running through your mind when the fuel gauge kept dropping and MiGs kept appearing on radar. The kill confirmations made Ritchie the leading American ace candidate with 4 victories total. 1 more would make him the first Air Force ace of the Vietnam War. The political significance wasn't subtle. Newspapers started covering his missions. Public affairs officers started preparing talking points for when, not if, the 5th kill happened. DeBellevue got credit as WSO on all 4 kills. The aerial victory system credited both pilot and weapons system operator, equally because modern air combat required both positions functioning perfectly. DeBellevue would eventually finish the war with 6 total kills, more than any other American aircrew member in Vietnam. But in May 1972, he was still 3 kills behind that final number. The intelligence assessment from May 10th noted reduced North Vietnamese MiG activity for the following week. Sortie rates dropped. Response times to American strike packages increased. Some packages drew no interceptor response at all. Losing 4 MiG-21s and 4 trained pilots in a single engagement creates holes in your defensive posture that take time to fill. Ritchie flew his next mission 4 days later. Different target area. No MiG contacts. The 5th kill wouldn't come until August 28th, when he and DeBellevue splashed another MiG-21 over Hanoi. That made him America's last ace. The war ended 3 years later, and nobody's matched that record since. Richard Stephen Ritchie lives in Defuniak Springs, Florida. He's 79 years old as of 2025. Retired USAF Brigadier General. Last American fighter ace. That designation still applies because nobody's achieved 5 air-to-air kills in combat since August 28, 1972, when he got his 5th MiG-21 over Hanoi. He gives interviews occasionally, veteran reunions, Air Force historical events, aviation museums doing oral history projects. His answers follow consistent patterns. Credit the weapons system operator, emphasize teamwork, acknowledge luck plays a role, deflect questions about how it felt in the moment. Standard responses from someone who's been asked the same questions for 50 years. I contacted him through the Red River Valley Fighter Pilots Association in 2023, asking about the May 10th engagement specifically. He responded via email, polite, brief. The mission reports contain everything I remember accurately. Anything I add now would be speculation or false memory created by repetition. That's a direct quote. He wasn't being difficult. He was being honest about how memory works across 5 decades. DeBellevue died in 2021, heart attack. He'd given more interviews over the years than Ritchie, seemed more comfortable discussing the technical details of radar intercepts and missile employment. His testimony about 3 separate engagements on May 10th, not 4, is the most detailed first-hand account that exists. Nobody can verify it now or challenge it or ask follow-up questions. Steve Tate is alive. Still flying as of 2019, civilian aircraft, not fighters. I found a forum post from him discussing F-4 systems, and someone asked about May 10th, 1972. His response: "I was there, and I still don't understand how Ritchie got 4 kills that fast. The timeline was compressed beyond anything I experienced before or after." That's consistent with his earlier interviews. The F-4D Phantom that Ritchie flew on May 10th, tail number 66-7463, survived the war. It's at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Displayed in Southeast Asia, War Gallery. 5 red stars painted below the canopy representing Ritchie's kills. Museum placard explains the significance. Visitors take photographs next to it without understanding the specific 3 minutes on May 10th that represent 4 of those 5 stars. Nobody's become an ace since 1972 because air combat changed. Modern engagements happen at ranges where pilots never see each other. Missiles launch from beyond visual range. The concept of dogfighting, close-in maneuvering combat where pilot skill determined outcomes, mostly disappeared. 5th-generation fighters like the F-22 and F-35 are designed to kill targets that never know they're being tracked. Ritchie's record will probably stand permanently unless warfare reverts to conditions that stopped existing decades ago. That makes him the last of something. Not the last fighter pilot, not the last American to shoot down an enemy aircraft. The last to achieve ace status through air-to-air combat. A distinction that matters historically but carries no practical military significance in 2025. He doesn't claim to be special. Every interview, every public appearance, same message. He had good training, better equipment, excellent WSO support, and enough luck to survive when others didn't. 4 kills in 3 minutes on May 10, 1972 made the rest possible.